Er died, not anything to do with Joseph. Er died because he was evil. Period. That's what it says. Then Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife, perform your duty as her brother-in-law, produce offspring for your brother. That seems a little bit awkward for us today. A tradition we no longer practice. Probably slightly illegal in some states, except West Virginia. But when you think about it, I mean, centuries after this event, this is Genesis, centuries after this event, this actual tradition is put into Deuteronomy, the Old Testament law. I mean, this is a legal obligation. When brothers live on the same property and one of them dies without a son, the wife of the dead man may not marry a stranger outside the family. Her brother-in-law is to take her as his wife, have sexual relations with her, and perform the duty of a brother-in-law for her. The first son she bears will carry on the name of the dead brother, so his name will not be blotted out from Israel. That was law. That wasn't only not wrong, but it was the right thing to do. And I think Harry's going to preach on the story of Ruth in a couple weeks. Hopefully, I'm not giving away, spoiling the plot. But the entire story of Ruth revolves around this idea of this kinsman redeemer, of this family relative taking the widow, bringing her into his family, because widows and orphans and people without family were just so vulnerable. So that is a great picture of how this system was supposed to work. This one, not so much. And then this even lasts until the time of Jesus and prompts a tricky question as the Sadducees tried to stump the Son of God in Matthew 22:23, which, being Jesus, had a pretty decent answer for it. But if you look at it, this tradition is still being handled about 1,000 years later, maybe 1,500 years later from this point. And just want you to get into the concept of this. At this time, during Judah's time, there isn't this real strong sense of an afterlife, of eternity. Okay? Heaven and hell and existing forever are concepts that aren't quite developed yet. The revelation in Scripture is hinting at it, but it's not coming fully fledged. And so your family lineage provided this sense of an afterlife. If my family continues, I can continue in them. Now this is in continuation after, living after your death is important to answer questions of meaning, purpose, and even justice. Wrongs committed against me could be righted for my descendants. Justice could be achieved for the family in the course of time if it wasn't for the individual. Justice is stretched out because my life isn't always just. Unfair things actually happen. And we have to look towards the future to see these things righted. We have to have some sort of hope in God setting things right for us because things aren't always right here and now. In the late 1800s with Harold Camping, that God stepping in amazingly to set things right is how they deal with injustice. At this time in Judah's life, it was this, maybe my descendants will experience the justice that I never did. So having your lineage preserved was a part of just one of the deepest needs we all have. Seeing wrongs righted, seeing fairness lived out. So this was not just some custom on the periphery. This was a custom that dealt with the deepest needs of being a person, of making sense of evil, of making sense of rightness. So it was a very important thing that was preserved for a millennium and a half at least. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. The son of a man who sold his brother into slavery wasn't willing to sacrifice his brother for his dead brother, his deceased brother. That should not be quite a surprise to us. This one, it looks a lot like the family. You know, Judah sells Joseph. Onan isn't willing to take care of his brother's wife, the widow of his brother. And Onan dies pretty much because he's evil. Onan is responsible for sin. His own sin, Onan's sin, leads to Onan's death. It's quite easy to explain, for the wages of sin is death. I mean, that just happens. And you might be thinking in your head, wait a minute, this doesn't seem fair. Okay, did deserve to die? Yes. Did Onan deserve to die? Yes. Does Judah deserve to die? The answer is yes. This story is not fair, but the unfair part is not what happens to Onan and Er. The unfair part is the grace extended to God to Judah. The mercy, God allows Judah to live for some strange reasons. God's mercy is the unfair part. And when we think about our lives, by what we do, how many times do we court death or the consequences of sin that we are just kind of graciously allowed to avoid? And this is going to be a cheesy example, but driving. Seriously, how many people have died doing the exact same thing that we all do on a relative basis, that it's just by a freak of nature that they died and we did? God just has been gracious to us. You know, there's sometimes where I do stupid things in a car and I don't die. It isn't that I didn't deserve to. It's basically God was gracious to me sometimes. So Onan dies because of his sin. Judah hasn't yet. And I have to be honest with you, I haven't yet either. For some reason God is still being gracious to me. True to his nature, Judah avoids things by holding off indefinitely on the third son. At least he's somewhat smart. Okay, first son died. Second son hooked up with Tamar, died. Let's wait till my last son, my only son. Let's try to put that off as long as possible. So, go into verse 12. After a long time, again another extended period of time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. The Canaanite woman, who's the mother of Er, Onan, and Shelah, dies. When Judah had finished mourning, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite went up to Timnah to the sheep shearers. Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." So she took off her widow's clothes, veiled her face, covered herself, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the way to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had grown up, she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He went out over to her and said, "Come, let me sleep with you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, "What will you give me for sleeping with me?" "I will send you a young goat from my flock," he replied. But she said, "Only if you leave something with me until you send it." "What should I give?" She answered, "Your signet ring, your cord, and the staff in your hand." So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she got pregnant by him. She got up and left, and then removed her veil and put on her widow's clothes back on. After a long time. It starts that way. So we have another extended period of time. So we're talking decades here that things are going unresolved, that people are avoiding dealing with family life. And during this long time, Judah has left Tamar waiting. Going back to the story of my grandmother. After her death, we go back through her stuff and find these letters written by her mom, begging her to just come back, or begging her to allow the grandparents to be in the lives of my mother and the three brothers. And it's this idea that she kept these letters, even though she never responded to them or did anything with them. These years, 40 years of unresolved relational issues. And for some of us, being on a college campus, we don't even have plural decades of life behind us. Some of us have just got into decades, probably. But quite often we'll have stuff. Harry knows what this is, being old now. We'll have stuff that we've been dealing with. I still have a month and some days. Dealing with stuff and avoiding stuff for years. There's a boss, a former boss of mine that I have personally avoided just because of how I left things. Now that's not really important, not a big part of my life. But it's just interesting to see how we'll do that. Judah had finished mourning his wife's death. Yet his daughter-in-law was still in the mourning clothes over his son's death. So Judah had left Tamar in this limbo by avoiding the situation for years. His avoidance of dealing with the thing had left Tamar stuck in the past. So he accidentally sleeps with his daughter-in-law. When you start the story by selling your brother to Ishmaelites, accidentally sleeping with your daughter-in-law doesn't seem to be that surprise of an ending. But when Judah set the young goat, go into verse 20, he sends a Elamite to go find this prostitute to pay her. You get the goat, I get my stuff back. But they can never find her. And the people of the hood say, well, there's never been a cult prostitute around here. What are you talking about? We don't know who you're talking about. So Judah says, well, like he normally does, we tried. I guess she can keep the stuff, and verse 23, let her keep the items for herself, otherwise we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send the goat, but you couldn't find her. So let's avoid shame, let's avoid public embarrassment, let's just drop the thing. I keep the goat, she keeps my robe, my cord, and my signet ring. Staff, yeah, there we go.